Hey guys, Political Junkie 2414 here, and welcome back to another video. So I wanted to say to you all, at the time that I am recording this, it is January 1st, 2024. Wanted to wish you all a happy New Year. Hope you all had a happy holiday season, and I'm looking forward to covering all the elections that will be happening this year. And I wanted to thank all of you for your support. We really grew this channel over the course of especially 2023. And I wanted to thank every single one of you because without your support, my growth and my ability to reach, I think I have about 170 subscribers right now, would not have been possible. So thank you all for your undying support. It really means the world to me, and I hope that that I can count on your support in the future, and that we can continue to grow this channel because this community really means a lot to me. So with that said, I wanted to take a look today. We are 2 weeks out from the first primaries for the first GOP presidential primaries or caucuses, um, which are going to determine who is the Republican nominee for president, which right now looks like overwhelmingly Donald Trump. And if you look at the national polling data, that assertion is absolutely backed up, especially on the national level. Trump right now, in the wake of several indictments and being disqualified in a couple from the ballot in a couple of states, or disqualified from being on the ballot in a couple of states. Trump's lead with the primary electorate for the GOP seems to have only grown as time goes on. And Ron DeSantis, who was the current governor of Florida, who was initially thought of as the only Republican who could beat Donald Trump in the wake of the 2022 midterms, it really looked like he had a chance to beat Trump. But as he waited and waited to make his announcement, Trump was able to attack him without DeSantis being able to respond because, again, he had not declared his candidacy, and did not until the end of May, at which point he had already lost so much momentum. He was not, Nikki candidates like Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, Asa Hutchinson, had announced before him, and DeSantis, his announcement came only weeks before Mike Pence and Chris Christie's announcements. Pence, of course, has already dropped out. Tim Scott has dropped out. I think he actually may have announced on the same day as DeSantis, maybe a little bit beforehand, but he is also out now. So right now we have a six-way race, really a five-way race as of today, between Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, Chris Christie, and Asa Hutchinson. But Hutchinson really, I think, is waiting it out, and I think after Iowa or even before Iowa, he will drop out because nationally he is doing terribly, and he's not doing any better on the state level. So when you look at this national lead, you can see Trump is very much the clear front runner, and I would absolutely agree with that. I think it is at this point very unlikely that he is not the GOP nominee. But again, we are exactly 2 weeks away from the Iowa caucuses for the GOP, which will be taking place on January 15th. And in these early states, such as Iowa, Trump's lead is not nearly as strong because, and it makes sense because a lot of these early states, are the places where Trump's challengers have really been campaigning for, because presidential primaries are a different kind of animal than, say, a Senate primary or a House primary because it's national. And so when you win somewhere else or when you pick up momentum somewhere else, and we'll talk about this mainly when it comes to New Hampshire in a little bit, um, when a candidate in a presidential primary does very well or exceeds the odds in an early state, um, say, for example, Joe Biden in South Carolina in 2020, it gives them momentum and gives them a national presence. And so, if we do see Trump potentially lag behind another candidate or just come close to losing in general in one of these early primary states, um, we could really see the numbers start to shift, and um, his opposition may end up growing. Now, I'm not necessarily predicting that, but again, anything is possible at this point. So you see in Iowa, Trump has a very massive lead over Ron DeSantis, who's coming in second place. DeSantis, I would say his campaign has really failed because of, one, his inability to recognize that December 2022 or January 2023 in that time frame was when he needed to announce that he was running. Everyone knew he was running. He was just keeping it under wraps, and that I think was a mistake for him because he allowed Trump to paint him as someone who was as not a great candidate, and I think he really helped to destroy his numbers. I think a lot of DeSantis's wounds in this primary have been self-inflicted, but I think also candidates, and this is very much true, I don't think this is deniable, but Nikki Haley and other top-tier Republicans like Chris Christie, although again, nationally he's not doing too well, I think that these candidates have really, really pulled away from DeSantis's chances. Again, in 2016, Donald Trump was able to win with only 45% of the national GOP primary popular vote, but because he had won he had come in first place in so many of those early primary states, such as New Hampshire, South Carolina, with several other GOP candidates in the race, he was able to get by. Now, again, those were plurality wins. Those were not states where Trump won a majority because his momentum had still been kind of lagging behind or had still not really picked up. Trump is essentially running as the former incumbent here. He is the former incumbent president. And so, while this primary isn't as competitive as 2016, it's not a give. It's not a. I don't want to say it's not a give me primary like 2020 was because then he was the incumbent, and he is running as the de facto incumbent here. But I think his record of having run previously as president and been the GOP nominee twice now, likely to be a third, that really gives him the upper hand here. And the primary electorate loves Trump. But you can see here in Iowa that he's at 50%, exactly 50%, just shy of a majority. And again, I do think that the polls in many of these states, these early states, are underestimating Trump's vote share. I don't think they're drastically underestimating it, but I do think Trump's going to get a majority in Iowa, say like 55, 56%, maybe a little bit higher. But Ron DeSantis looks to be the narrow second place or seems to be coming in second place. Nikki Haley's lagging a little behind at 16%. It depends on the poll that you look at, but really, sometimes DeSantis and Haley are tied. Sometimes Haley's actually in front of DeSantis. It really depends on the poll, but again, we're looking at the averages right now. That's what we were looking at for the national polls too. Vivek Ramaswamy, I think, really he's still has drawn a lot of attention for his bombastic debate performances is what I'll say, but his campaign seems to be really lagging behind. He's canceled TV ads in Iowa, and I honestly think after Iowa there's a good chance he drops out. I also think Chris Christie isn't is not doesn't really have a chance at this point. I think we'll talk about him as we go on to New Hampshire, but I will say ahead of time that I do believe Trump is the favorite in all four of these primary states, but I just think that you know, these are where you start to see the cracks in his support because this is where his opponents are mainly campaigning ahead of Super Tuesday, which would be the real test to see if the momentum lasts. But we go on to New Hampshire, and this is the state where if Donald Trump loses this primary, um, it could really, really set. It could. This is the state where I think my point about state primary results affecting national results really, really comes into play. I think that New Hampshire has been really good for Nikki Haley. At first, Chris Christie has based basically his entire campaign on the state, but I think that Nikki Haley is Chris Christie's weakness, um, electorally speaking. I'm just speaking this from an objective standpoint. Is that the GOP electorate loves Trump? All right, we can see that. And when you're running a campaign against Trump, whether you agree with him or not, it is definitely going to you're kind of putting yourself in a box. And I think Christie initially, before Haley's, as Haley was still getting, going from debate to debate, and wasn't at the point where she was today, hadn't yet received the endorsement of New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu. I think that Christie really still had a chance. Ron DeSantis now is in fourth place. He was seen, early last year as someone who, as the guy who could beat Trump in New Hampshire, and Vivek Ramaswamy was taking away votes from him. Haley and Christie were taking away votes, but now it really looks like that while and Ramaswamy are clearly not contenders for second place or really don't have a chance in the world, and Chris Christie seems to be pulling away votes from Haley, that or votes that could potentially go to Nikki Haley, who I would say is if Christie drops out, whether or not he endorses Haley, I think that would really a lot of his more moderate, independent leaning voters who might be voting in the GOP primary here would probably go to her because they'd see her as a more moderate choice. Does that mean all 11% would go to Haley? Not necessarily, but I think that the majority of Christie's voters would back her. And I think right now, Nikki Haley, if she does win in New Hampshire, which is possible, it really gives her a good chance. If you look at some of these polls right here, you can see that Trump's lead in New Hampshire is the narrowest out of these four primary states, and I think that that is because the electorate here is a lot less Make America Great Again. It's the Republican primary electorate, as shown by certain polls, is actually a majority pro-choice, which is very interesting. They are not as identified with the MAGA wing of the party as say the Iowa GOP primary electorate, which is mainly which is largely made up of white evangelical voters who are backing Trump largely, but also DeSantis. Um, but I think New Hampshire, Haley has a path here, but it's very complicated. And I would say Trump right now, despite the polls showing him that he's not, that he doesn't have the majority, I do think he is still um, likely to get over 50%. But I think Haley right now does come up second place as evidenced by many of these polls. Now, again, I don't want to act like polls are everything. To be honest with you, I think that even if Haley was not having to contend with Chris Christie likely pulling away votes from her, Ron DeSantis pulling away votes from her, that she would make this race closer, but I don't think that she would necessarily win. But this is an interesting poll by Americans for Prosperity that was released or was taken from during a 2-day period back in December, where it shows Trump, uh, a typical, a poll with Trump and all the other candidates still currently in the race. You see Trump at 45, Haley at 32, Christie at 9, DeSantis at 6, Ramaswamy at 3, and Hutchinson, not even at 1%. But if you look at when you take a look at a connected poll or a one-on-one matchup poll that Americans for Prosperity also conducted alongside this, you know, this poll right here, you can see in a one-on-one matchup with DeSantis, Trump wins easily, 25% victory. But you take a look at a one-on-one matchup with Haley in this same poll, and and the voters say they prefer Trump, but 3% of voters say they prefer Trump over Haley. That's a massive, massive decrease in margin. And honestly, I don't know. I think that if Haley is to win New Hampshire again, it's going to be a narrow victory if she does. And I think Trump's lead here is not insurmountable, but it is going to be very hard to win because I do believe Trump is above 45%. I think he's inching close to 50. I think Haley, I think a lot of her momentum has come from presenting herself as a quote unquote more professional candidate, as someone who is seems a little bit more moderate on some social issues, which is absolutely important for a state like New Hampshire, where I mean their motto is "live free or die," and I think that that really translates to their social liberal view to most of to the state's socially liberal views and their fiscally conservative attitude. Um, but I think Haley, again, I will bring up the comments that she made about the Civil War. So if you haven't heard already, I think last week she was at Haley was at a town hall in New Hampshire and taking questions when um, some person in the audience asked her what the cause of the Civil War was, and she kind of danced around it, kind of threw the question back at him, asking him, what do you think it was? But she avoided to use the word slavery. Now, she did acknowledge this and she did apologize for her comments. And honestly, I don't know what to think of it. Some GOP strategists, I think, have been sounding the alarm, and I do agree with them that this is and with a political article in particular that talks about how this is Haley's first sort of hurdle, and it comes at a bad time as she is doing very well in New Hampshire and only has, a couple weeks to really bounce back from this. But honestly, I don't know how much of an impact this is going to have. I've seen the voters saying that this was blown out of proportion, and of course, the media loves to obsess when candidates make gaffes. I mean, just think about if you haven't heard about Howard Dean and his little woo scream in 2004, that was way blown out of proportion. I think a lot of people would agree with me. So overall, I think that this doesn't really hurt. That doesn't really hurt Haley here, but I think that really her main problem here is, first of all, overcoming Trump, but also having to contend with Chris Christie, who is pulling away voters that would likely go to her, and that's the same for DeSantis and Ramaswamy. Although I do think Ramaswamy's voters are more likely to switch over to Trump, a good portion of them, but I think, and some DeSantis voters as well, but still, I think Haley, if she wants to win this race, which I think if she wants to get Christie, or if she wants to win this New Hampshire primary and gain some momentum before South Carolina, which we'll talk about in a second, she's going to probably have to usurp more votes from Chris Christie. But honestly, I don't know how much more time she has to do that, and she's still, according to this at 538 average, down by almost 20 points to Trump, which again is better than it is in Iowa or Trump's lead in Iowa or even South Carolina, but it is still still not the place where she necessarily wants to be. So, and Christie has made it very clear that he's staying in until New Hampshire. And so, if New Hampshire comes and goes and Trump wins without less than 50%, and Haley is seems to be inhibited by Christie's presence on the ballot, that's really going to make it hard for her to gain any further steam. But then let's go to South Carolina, and this is where I think it gets interesting, especially if Haley does win New Hampshire, because South Carolina is similar to Iowa or to New Hampshire in the fact that Haley is running second place. Um, but she has always, this is the state where she has been consistently polling well in, and I think Tim Scott's early withdrawal, or somewhat early withdrawal in November after the presidential debate, I think that did he was siphoning off votes from Haley. In fact, at one point, Haley was running beneath him in the primary. But this was mainly before I think the debates. And DeSantis has really stayed in the mid-teens to high double digits. Trump has a commanding lead here, but again, winning one state in a presidential primary, especially an early state like New Hampshire, would be could help can help a candidate. And I think in that case, with South Carolina being Haley's former state, the state that she was governor of before she was UN ambassador, I think that could really, if um, there are signs, if New Hampshire goes to Haley, and that's going to show a lot of GOP primary voters and of Haley's strength, and I think that it's going to show that there's a crack in his support in nationally, and I think that that's going to translate to Haley rising nationally in the polls and also in South Carolina. And so I think that if she can win New Hampshire and then follow it up with a win in South Carolina, that puts her in a very interesting position ahead of Super Tuesday, especially if Trump um, is distracted by a lot of his other criminal cases. And if he's convicted, I think that really might be the one thing that gets GOP primary voters to not vote for him, especially if he drops out. If he withdraws from the race, which I'm sure he would be reluctant to do at first when if he's convicted, I do think eventually he would give in because um, he might think that focusing his time on these criminal cases um, without the distraction of the presidential race might be a better move for him if he wants to stay out of prison. But regardless, we'll go to the final state. Actually, Nevada, I think, is before South Carolina. This is one where we haven't had a lot of polling, but Trump is doing the best here in Nevada. I really don't see. Um, I think he's, you know, all these polls show him in the 60s, or high above everyone else with 50, 60 point leads over DeSantis, Haley, Christie, who may not even be in the race. Or Christie probably wouldn't be in the race after New Hampshire. Um, but I think DeSantis and Haley would maybe, get a combined vote share, maybe 20 or 25%, and Trump would take about the rest, maybe he a little bit more, maybe they combined for 30%. But again, Nevada, I think, really is the strongest state of these early states for Trump. I think also Michigan is an early state um, before the others, but or before Super Tuesday, but it is, I think, after South Carolina. So the order goes Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina, and Michigan. But Trump is doing very well in Michigan, and especially if Haley is unable to get ahead of him in New Hampshire and follow it up with a win in South Carolina, I think that we wouldn't see much improvement here. In fact, we might just see a further improvement for Trump. So overall, what to take away from what I've been saying is that the national polls and the national momentum can really change based on one of these early states. We've talked about it a lot. I think that right now it's unlikely that anyone other than Trump wins any of these four primary states, but there is a possibility, especially there is an opening, especially for Nikki Haley, to come in and take this race away from Donald Trump, and or especially if he finds himself um, really troubled by a lot of these cases and in hot water with the law. And so I think that really makes it really kind of is an interesting thing to think about, because you look at this national polling data and you say, well, there's no way Trump can lose. And I would agree with you at the moment, but again, the polls change, especially after these early primary states, which candidates spend most of the lead up into the election year focusing on. And so if we do see Haley or another candidate, if Ron DeSantis manages in the next couple weeks to somehow find a way to win Iowa or New Hampshire, which I think is very unlikely, um, I think that we could see a shift in the national polls, because, again, when voters in one state pick a candidate, voters in another state look at that and say, wow, they have a lot of momentum. And especially if, for the Republicans and Republican donors who don't want Trump to be the nominee again, if they see Haley has a pathway through a victory in New Hampshire, then will help her in South Carolina and help give her campaign some more momentum. So it's kind of an interesting chain reaction process when it comes to these presidential primaries. And I just wanted to kind of discuss it. So thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what you think about the early results in these states, and just overall who you think has the best chance to maybe take away one of these early states from Donald Trump. I think um, for me, the answer is easily Nikki Haley, but I'm interested to see your opinions and see if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Again, I just wanted to make this video. I will be starting to get more busy with the new year coming around, and my personal life is going to make it a little bit more difficult to upload, as I have during the holiday season, to the same extent that I have during the holiday season. But yeah, I just wanted to address that, and thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check out some of my other videos on this channel, some of my other content. Share this video with someone who you think would enjoy it, and thank you all for your support. And I'll see you guys next time when I talk about all things politics. See ya.